What if I told you that the more spiritually awake you become, the harder it is to fall in love? That the same awareness you prayed for, the one that freed you from illusions, also took away your ability to lose yourself in someone else? There comes a point on the path of consciousness where the butterflies die quietly, and something deeper takes their place. You stop confusing intensity with connection. You stop chasing chemistry and start craving truth. Love no longer feels like a fire that consumes you, but like a mirror that exposes everything you still need to heal. Carl Jung once said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. And that's the secret most people never realize. Awakening doesn't end your capacity to love. It ends your capacity to pretend. Because when your soul wakes up, you no longer fall, you rise. When we meet someone who makes our heart race and our palms sweat, what's really happening beneath the surface? According to Jung's analytical psychology, what we experience as romantic attraction often has little to do with the actual person standing before us. Instead, we're encountering powerful forces from our own unconscious mind, projections that transform ordinary humans into extraordinary beings capable of fulfilling our deepest needs. These projections aren't random. They spring from archetypal patterns buried deep within our collective unconscious. The most powerful of these, for romance, are what Jung called the anima and animus, the feminine aspect within men and the masculine aspect within women. When we're unaware, we project these inner figures onto potential partners, seeing in them qualities that actually belong to parts of ourselves we haven't yet recognized or developed. This projection process creates the intoxicating feeling we call falling in love. It's a state of beautiful delusion where we temporarily escape our ordinary consciousness. We become enchanted, seeing the other person through a magical lens that transforms them into the answer to questions we didn't even know we were asking. The early stage of romance that makes us feel alive, electrified, and complete is actually a profound case of mistaken identity. We believe we're seeing the other person, but we're actually seeing aspects of our own soul reflected back to us. The intensity isn't coming from them. It's coming from the power of our own unconscious material being activated. This explains why passion fades. As Jung observed, projections are unstable by nature. They cannot be maintained indefinitely. Over time, the real person inevitably emerges from behind the veil of our projections. The magic seems to disappear, not because something is wrong with the relationship, but because reality is asserting itself over fantasy. For those who remain spiritually unawakened, this becomes a painful cycle. When projections fade in one relationship, they simply search for a new screen onto which they can project the same unconscious material. They chase the high of falling in love again and again, never understanding why relationships follow the same disappointing pattern. But what happens when spiritual awakening begins? The very nature of awakening involves becoming conscious of unconscious processes. We start to recognize our projections as they happen. We catch ourselves in the act of transforming ordinary humans into gods and goddesses. We begin to see how our mind creates these powerful illusions that we mistake for love. This awareness doesn't happen all at once. It's a gradual process of disillusionment, not in the negative sense of becoming cynical, but in the literal sense of removing illusions. We slowly develop the capacity to distinguish between our projections and the actual person before us. We start to question the intoxicating feelings that once defined romance for us. This is why spiritually awakened people seem to fall in love less frequently. They haven't lost their capacity for connection. They've lost their capacity for unconscious projection. They can no longer maintain the beautiful delusion that the other person is the source of the magic. They've seen behind the curtain and recognized that what felt like magic was actually their own psyche at work. This realization can initially feel like a loss. The colors seem less vivid, the music less enchanting. But Jung recognized this as a necessary step towards something far more meaningful, the possibility of real love based on seeing and accepting another person as they truly are, not as a screen for our projections. The awakened person begins to understand that authentic connection can only happen between two people who are consciously present, not between one person and their projection on another. This marks the beginning of a profound transformation in how they approach relationships, a transformation that continues with the next crucial stage of spiritual development, confronting the shadow. Once we start to recognize how our projections create the illusion of romantic love, we face an even more challenging discovery, the shadow. In Jungian psychology, the shadow represents all the parts of ourselves we've disowned, repressed, or never developed, the aspects of our personality deemed unacceptable by our family, culture, or our own conscious self-image. This shadow doesn't simply disappear when we reject it. It lives within us, influencing our behavior in ways we don't recognize. And nowhere does it emerge more powerfully than in our intimate relationships. The very qualities we most strongly reject in ourselves become the ones that trigger us most intensely in others. As spiritual awakening deepens, we begin the painful process of shadow recognition. We start to see how our romantic attractions often contain hidden shadow elements. We're drawn not just to people who embody our unconscious ideal, but also to those who trigger our unresolved wounds and embody qualities we've rejected in ourselves. This explains why passionate relationships so often combine intense attraction with equally intense conflict. The same person who activates our anima or animus projections also activates our shadow material. We find ourselves loving and hating the same person, sometimes in the same moment, without understanding why our emotions swing so wildly. For the spiritually awakening individual, this realization brings both pain and possibility. The pain comes from recognizing how our unconscious shadow has shaped our relationship patterns. We see clearly, perhaps for the first time, how we've been attracted to partners who help us reenact unresolved childhood wounds. We notice how we've been unconsciously seeking people who treat us in familiar ways, even when those ways cause suffering. But this recognition also creates the possibility of genuine transformation. Jung emphasized that we cannot transcend what we haven't first acknowledged. By bringing the shadow into consciousness, we begin the work of integration, accepting disowned parts of ourselves instead of projecting them onto others. As this integration progresses, something remarkable happens to our experience of attraction and connection. We become less magnetized by people who trigger our unresolved wounds. We develop the capacity to distinguish between authentic attraction and the compelling pull of unconscious shadow material seeking resolution. The awakened person starts to recognize that many of the qualities that once seemed magical or irresistible in others were actually signposts pointing to their own internal work. They see how the intensity of attraction often correlated with the intensity of their unconscious shadow material being activated. This doesn't mean they stop appreciating others or feeling drawn to them, but the nature of attraction shifts from unconscious compulsion to conscious appreciation. They no longer need others to complete them or resolve their internal conflicts. Instead, they approach relationships from a place of greater wholeness. This stage of awakening explains another reason why spiritually awakened people seem to fall in love less frequently. Their criteria for meaningful connection have fundamentally changed. They're no longer looking for someone to play a role in their unconscious drama or to fulfill needs they haven't acknowledged. They're looking for authentic connection between two conscious beings. As the shadow integration continues, the awakened person discovers they can witness their attractions and emotional responses without being completely identified with them. They develop the capacity to ask, is this authentic connection, or is this my shadow-seeking expression? This level of self-awareness transforms not just how they love, but who they find themselves drawn to in the first place. The journey through shadow work creates the foundation for the next phase of transformation, moving beyond the social mask, or what Jung called the persona, into more authentic expression in relationships. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the SIM Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. The persona in Jung's psychology represents the social mask we wear, the face we present to the world. It's not necessarily false, but it's certainly incomplete. It's the version of ourselves we've crafted to function in society, gain approval, and meet external expectations. For most people, romantic relationships begin and often remain entirely at the level of persona-to-persona interaction. Think about early dating. We present our best selves. We carefully manage impressions. We reveal what feels safe and hide what might be judged. This dance of personas can create a sense of connection, but it's ultimately a connection between partial versions of two people. It's like two actors falling in love while remaining in character, authentic in feeling perhaps, but limited in depth. The spiritually awakening person encounters a profound dilemma here. As consciousness expands, they become increasingly aware of the gap between their persona and their authentic self. They notice how their relationship patterns have been shaped by the need to maintain certain social masks. They recognize how much energy goes into managing impressions rather than being genuinely present. This awareness creates a kind of crisis in relating to others. The awakened person can no longer engage wholeheartedly in the persona-level games that once structured their romantic life. Small talk feels hollow. Social scripts feel constraining. The carefully managed dance of early dating feels like a performance rather than a connection. What others experience as normal, the awakened person increasingly experiences as a kind of sleepwalking, a semi-conscious state where everyone follows unwritten rules without questioning them. The awakened individual finds themselves longing for something more real, more raw, more honest than what conventional romantic scripts allow. This shift explains another reason why spiritually awakened people seem to fall in love less frequently. They've lost patience with persona-level connections. They can no longer convince themselves that the initial chemistry between two social masks represents meaningful connection. They've glimpsed something deeper, and they can't unsee it. The spiritually awakened person begins to recognize how often what we call compatibility is actually just the comfortable fitting together of complementary personas. He works hard, she creates a beautiful home. He provides stability, she brings spontaneity. These arrangements can work well at the social level, but they don't necessarily involve genuine seeing or being seen. Jung observed that many relationships function as unconscious agreements. I won't ask you to be your full self if you don't ask me to be mine. The awakened person can no longer participate in these unspoken contracts. They've become too aware of their own multidimensional nature to reduce themselves to a simplified role or function in someone else's life. This doesn't mean they become incapable of compromise or cooperation. Rather, they seek a new foundation for relationship, one based on conscious choice rather than unconscious compliance with social expectations. They want authenticity without abandoning responsibility. They seek to bring their whole selves to relationship without imposing that self on others. As the awakened person moves beyond persona-driven connections, they discover new possibilities for intimacy. They begin to create relationships where growth is valued over comfort, truth over harmony, and authentic expression over role fulfillment. These relationships may look unconventional from the outside because they're no longer governed primarily by social scripts. This stage of awakening brings both freedom and responsibility. The freedom comes from releasing the need to maintain a consistent social mask in intimate relationships. The responsibility comes from recognizing that authentic relating requires ongoing consciousness, choice, and communication. The spiritually awakened person understands that moving beyond the persona doesn't mean abandoning all boundaries or social consideration. Instead, it means bringing conscious choice to how they express themselves, rather than being unconsciously driven by the need for approval or the fear of rejection. This more conscious approach to self-expression naturally leads to the next phase of transformation in how awakened people experience love and connection, the integration of the masculine and feminine principles within themselves. Central to Jung's understanding of human psychology are the concepts of anima and animus, the contrasexual archetypes within each person. The anima represents the feminine qualities within a man's psyche, while the animus represents the masculine qualities within a woman's. These inner figures profoundly influence how we experience attraction and relationship. For the unawakened person, these inner figures remain largely unconscious, creating a powerful sense of incompleteness. There's an inner feminine or masculine aspect that seeks expression and recognition, but without awareness of this inner dynamic, we project it outward. We seek in others what we haven't recognized within ourselves. This projection creates the powerful feeling that another person completes us. When someone activates our inner anima or animus image, we experience a sense of wholeness that feels magical. This is the root of many intense attractions and the feeling that we've met our other half. It's not that the other person actually completes us, it's that they temporarily allow us to experience the completeness that comes from reconnecting with disowned parts of ourselves. The problem with this unconscious dynamic is its instability. No external person can perfectly match or permanently carry our inner anima or animus projection. Over time, the real person inevitably fails to embody our unconscious ideal, creating disappointment and conflict. We feel let down without understanding why. For the spiritually awakening individual, a profound transformation begins to occur. As consciousness expands, they start to recognize and reclaim these projected aspects of themselves. A man begins to integrate his own inner feminine qualities instead of seeking them exclusively through relationship with women. A woman begins to embody her own inner masculine strength rather than searching for it in men. This integration doesn't happen all at once. It's a gradual process of recognizing how much of what we seek in others actually represents disowned parts of ourselves. The awakened person begins to see how their attractions have been shaped by the search for external completion rather than internal wholeness. As anima and animus integration progresses, something remarkable happens to the experience of attraction and connection. The desperate quality of needing another person to feel complete begins to dissolve. The awakened individual no longer approaches relationships from a place of fundamental lack. Instead, they come from a growing sense of internal wholeness. This shift fundamentally changes what they seek in relationships. Rather than looking for someone to complete them, they look for someone who resonates with their own completeness. Rather than projecting unmet needs, they seek authentic connection between two increasingly whole human beings. Jung observed that this integration creates the possibility for a new kind of love, one based on recognition rather than need. The awakened person begins to see others not as means to wholeness, but as unique beings on their own journeys toward integration. This vision allows for a love that respects otherness rather than trying to use it to fulfill unconscious needs. This doesn't mean the awakened person becomes indifferent to connection. On the contrary, their capacity for genuine appreciation deepens. They can see and value others more clearly because they're no longer looking through the distorting lens of projection and need. They can love more authentically because they're no longer using others as vehicles for their own unconscious material. This stage explains another dimension of why spiritually awakened people seem to fall in love less frequently. The unconscious drive to find completion through another has begun to dissolve. The compulsive quality of romantic attraction diminishes as internal integration increases. They become more selective, not because they've become more judgmental, but because they've become more conscious of what genuine connection actually requires. As anima and animus integration deepens, the awakened person discovers they can experience inner wholeness without external validation or completion. This doesn't eliminate the desire for connection, but it transforms it from an unconscious compulsion to a conscious choice. They no longer need relationship to feel complete, which paradoxically creates the foundation for more authentic relating. This more integrated approach to connection naturally leads to the next phase of transformation, the process of individuation and its profound impact on how we experience love. Individuation stands at the heart of Jung's psychological framework, a lifelong journey toward greater wholeness and authenticity. It's the process through which we move beyond the conditioning of family, culture, and collective expectations to discover and express our unique essence. For Jung, individuation wasn't optional for psychological health, it was essential. This journey transforms every aspect of life, but perhaps none more profoundly than how we experience love and connection. The unindividuated person approaches relationships from an unconscious state of fusion and projection. They haven't yet distinguished their own needs, values, and purpose from those they've inherited. Their sense of self remains entangled with others, making clear boundaries and authentic connection difficult. For such individuals, romantic passion often serves as a temporary escape from the anxiety of an unfulfilled life. The intensity of early attraction creates a powerful altered state, a kind of psychological vacation from the burden of an undeveloped self. This explains why many people become addicted to the early stages of romance. It provides relief from the quiet desperation of an unlived life. The spiritually awakening person encounters a fundamental shift in this pattern. As individuation progresses, they begin to recognize how their approach to relationships has been shaped by unconscious needs for identity, validation, and purpose. They see clearly how they've used romantic connections as substitutes for their own unfulfilled individuation. This recognition creates a crucial turning point. The awakened person can no longer use relationships to escape from themselves. They can no longer project their unlived potential onto partners or expect others to provide meaning and purpose. They must face the challenge of becoming themselves, a journey no one else can undertake for them. This stage of awakening often coincides with a period of voluntary solitude or selective connection. The awakened individual needs space to hear their own inner voice, without the constant influence of others' expectations or needs. They need to distinguish between authentic desires and conditioned patterns. This doesn't necessarily mean physical isolation, but it does require psychological separation, the ability to maintain a distinct sense of self even in intimate connection. As individuation deepens, the awakened person discovers that genuine love becomes possible only between two individuals who are each committed to their own becoming. Jung observed that unconscious relationships tend to promote mutual dependency rather than mutual growth. Both people remain stuck because neither has developed the capacity to stand firmly in their own truth and purpose. The individuating person begins to seek a new kind of connection, one that supports rather than hinders authentic development. They want relationships that challenge them to grow rather than relationships that offer comfort at the expense of authenticity. They seek companions for the journey of becoming rather than substitutes for their own unfulfilled potential. This shift fundamentally changes what chemistry feels like. The intense, consuming passion that once defined romantic attraction starts to feel more like danger than desire. The awakened person recognizes that certain forms of falling in love actually represent a falling away from themselves, a loss of center rather than a genuine connection. Instead, they become attracted to people who respect and support their individuation. They seek connections where both people can hold the tension of being both intimately connected and psychologically separate. They want love that expands rather than restricts their becoming. This doesn't mean relationships become cold or utilitarian. On the contrary, the capacity for genuine intimacy deepens. The awakened person discovers that real closeness becomes possible only when two people can each stand in their own truth while remaining open to the other. True intimacy requires both authentic selfhood and the willingness to be affected by encounter. This stage explains yet another dimension of why spiritually awakened people seem to fall in love less frequently. The adolescent model of romance, based on fusion, projection, and escape from self, no longer appeals to them. They've glimpsed the possibility of something more mature and fulfilling, conscious love between two individuals on their own paths of becoming. As individuation progresses, the awakened person discovers that love itself transforms. It becomes less about what they can get from others and more about what can be created between authentic beings. It shifts from consumption to co-creation, from need to appreciation, from escape to presence. This more individuated approach to connection creates the foundation for the final transformation in how awakened people experience love, the capacity to hold and reconcile the tension of opposites within relationship. At the heart of Jung's psychology lies a revolutionary understanding. Psychological wholeness comes not from eliminating inner conflicts, but from holding the tension between opposing forces until a higher integration emerges. Jung called this the transcendent function, the psyche's natural movement toward greater wholeness through the integration of opposites. This principle transforms how the awakened person experiences love and relationship. The unawakened approach to romance often involves seeking harmony through sameness. We look for partners who share our values, reinforce our worldview, and help us avoid internal and external conflict. We're drawn to what feels familiar and comfortable, even when that familiarity keeps us stuck in unconscious patterns. The spiritually awakening person begins to recognize the limitations of this approach. They see how seeking only comfort and agreement in relationships leads to stagnation rather than growth. They notice how avoiding conflict often means avoiding truth. They recognize that many apparently harmonious relationships maintain their stability by keeping certain questions unasked and certain truths unspoken. As consciousness expands, the awakened individual discovers a paradox. Genuine connection requires both harmony and discord, both comfort and challenge. Each person brings not just their conscious values and preferences, but also their shadow material, their wounds, and their unlived potential. Real relationship must make space for all of this complexity, not just the easy parts. Jung observed that many relationships deteriorate not because the people involved are incompatible, but because they lack the psychological capacity to hold the tension of opposing needs, values, and perspectives. When conflict arises, they either suppress their differences, creating resentment, or express them destructively, creating damage. They haven't yet developed the capacity to use the energy of opposition as fuel for growth. The awakened person begins to approach relationship differences differently. Rather than seeing conflicts as problems to eliminate, they start to recognize them as invitations to deeper understanding and integration. They develop the capacity to hold seemingly irreconcilable tensions between autonomy and connection, stability and growth, familiarity and novelty, without collapsing into either pole. This more conscious approach allows for a new kind of intimacy, one that makes space for the full complexity of human experience. The awakened person no longer needs to fragment themselves to maintain connection. They don't need to hide certain aspects to keep the peace. They can bring their whole, contradictory, evolving self to the relationship. This stage reveals the ultimate reason why spiritually awakened people seem to fall in love less frequently. Their understanding of love itself has fundamentally transformed. They no longer mistake intensity for intimacy or comfort for connection. They've discovered that real love emerges not from escaping into romantic fantasy, but from the courage to be fully present with another human being in all their complexity. The awakened person recognizes that authentic relationship isn't about finding someone who makes them feel consistently good. It's about finding someone with whom they can be consistently real. This realness includes joy and sorrow, harmony and conflict, connection and separation, the full spectrum of human experience held within the container of conscious awareness. Jung believed that this capacity to hold the tension of opposites within relationship creates the possibility for something he called the conjunctio, a profound union that transcends the limitations of ego-based connection. This isn't the merging of two incomplete halves, but the creative dance between two whole individuals, each containing their own inner masculine and feminine, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability. This more integrated understanding doesn't make relationships easier in the conventional sense. The awakened person may actually find themselves facing greater challenges as they refuse to settle for the comfortable illusions that sustain many connections. They demand more, not more perfection, but more truth, more consciousness, more genuine presence. Yet this demanding path leads to previously unimaginable possibilities for connection. The awakened person discovers that beyond the death of unconscious passion lies the birth of conscious love. Beyond the loss of romantic fantasy lies the discovery of something far more fulfilling, the ongoing creative encounter between two evolving beings, each committed to their own truth while remaining open to being changed by authentic connection. This is the ultimate paradox that Jung's psychology reveals about awakening and love. Only by releasing our attachment to the unconscious fantasy of perfect union can we discover the possibility of real connection. Only by accepting the imperfect, contradictory nature of ourselves and others can we create relationships that support genuine growth and authentic expression. The spiritually awakened person no longer falls in love in the conventional sense. Instead, they rise into a more conscious, more demanding, and ultimately more fulfilling experience of human connection, one that embraces the full complexity of what it means to be human in relationship with another equally complex being. As you journey toward greater consciousness, remember that what you're losing isn't love itself, but the unconscious illusions that once passed for love. What awaits beyond the familiar patterns of projection and need isn't emptiness, but a profound capacity for connection that few ever discover. The awakened heart doesn't fall blindly. It rises deliberately, choosing truth over comfort, authenticity over escape. This path demands more courage than the old romantic scripts ever required. The courage to remain awake even when sleep seems sweeter. To stand in your truth even when merging feels safer. But what you'll discover is worth everything you release. Not the intoxicating rush of unconscious passion, but the quiet miracle of being fully present with another soul who sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. This is the love that doesn't consume you. This is the love that sets you free.